This is Reid and Matthew electronic project 2. This is our flow chart. What we expected to happen was clearing all the variables in history. We're going to initialize the Arduino, initialize all the variables necessary. Then we're going to hop right into reading the sensor. If the sensor is less than 1.2 volts, meaning that the water's low, we're going to turn the pump on. We're going to define the pump as being on. And if the pump was just turned on from previously being off, we're going to start the timer and define the previous pump state as being on. If it wasn't just turned on, previous pump states are going to be defined as 1 and on again. Just a little bit of redundancy. Then you're going to come back up in this while loop, read the sensor again. If the sensor ends up being less than 1.2 volts, or if the sensor ends up not being less than 1.2 volts, that means it's above. And if it's greater than 3.3 volts, which means the water's too high, we're going to turn the pump off, define the pump as being off. And if the pump was just turned off, we're going to stop from being on. We're going to stop the timer, record the timer, or the time that the pump was on for, and display the message. And then circle back up to read sensor. Now, if this is no, as in the pump is not greater than 3.3 volts, that means it's still filling up, and just circle back up to reading the sensor until one of these is met. Then, if the pump was not just turned on, or if the pump was not just turned off, then we're going to define the previous state of the pump as being off. Oh, and we're also going to define the previous state of the pump as off here. Previous state of pump is off, and then we're just going to circle it back up to reading the sensor.
This is engineering project number 2, Reid Bartles and Matthew Casey. Where I measured the voltages at 0, like where the water isn't touching the the water sensor, and I read 0.009, and when it just touches the water sensor, like just touches it right there at the bottom, I read 1.2 volts. So when the sensor is less than 1.2 volts, then I write the digital pin AD5, and that sends the the voltage to the relay, which turns on the pump. And then at 55 ounces, I read 3.4 volts. So I set the sensor to greater than 3.3 volts. So when it reaches up there, it stops. So as you see here, when I plug this in and then hit run, it rises to the 55 mark, and then it goes down. And then once it reaches the bottom, it goes back up. As soon as the pump starts, I will stop the stopwatch. And then when it stops, we'll read the code. Alright, and then when we get here, the pump was running for 22.5 seconds, and I have here on my stopwatch 22.59.